Hola, mi clase. So we are doing 9.4, solving quadratic equations using square roots. So we're kind of blending 9.3 and 9.2 in a sense together. So properties of equality, it allows you to balance out equations by doing the same property on each side of the equation. That's just how we solve equations, right? If I add to one side, I add to the other side. If I divide to one side, I divide to the other side. And then just another reminder that quadratic equations are equations with a degree of 2. Any time you see an equation with a degree of 2, it is considered a quadratic. So it says, what are the solutions of the equations x squared equals 49? So it says solutions. So I'm going to point out to you that technically x squared equals 49 has 2 answers. So when the inverse of squaring, as we've talked about, is square rooting. So we would technically square root this. And most people would just say that x equals 7. And you would be half right. Technically, I can also get x equals -7. And that's because if I take 7 squared and do it in my calculator, I get 49. And if I take -7, very specifically squared, because that's -7 times -7, I actually also get 49. So the way we write the answer is you actually go x equals plus or minus 7. And this is the answer in one final step. Okay, so we're just kind of introducing that quadratics can have 2 answers. We did actually see that in 9.2. We had like x equals 4 and x equals, -2. So quadratics can have 2 answers, and this is what it would look like if it was exactly the same number, but one positive and one negative. Okay, and we write it like this, plus or minus 7. And you can read it that way too. It just means the positive of 7 and the negative of 7. And just to clarify, it's just a plus sign with a minus sign underneath. So again, what are the solutions of the equation x squared equals -121? So to solve it, we technically do the inverse, which is to square root. And I'm going to actually tell you, if you put this into your calculator, square root -121, you're going to get no solution. You cannot take the square root of a negative. 11 times 11 is 121, but -11 times -11 is still positive 121. It's not negative. There's no way to get a negative squared number. Okay, so anytime you take the square root of a negative, the answer is actually no solution because there is nothing I can multiply by itself to get a negative answer. So that's what that means. So it says, what are the solutions of the equation 7x squared equals 112? So we will solve these just like we do equations. I'm just going to rewrite it because I kind of like it down here. So I'm going to divide by 7 first because division in inverse operations actually comes first and exponents come second. So this is where my calculator comes in handy. And I divide 112 by 7, and we actually get 16. So I get x squared equals 16. I'm going to square root. Now, if you put in your calculator the square root of 16, it's only going to give you one answer, which happens to be 4. But we need to remember that -4 also square root or squares to 16. So our answer would be plus or minus 4, because we need to remember that technically all square roots have 2 answers, the positive and the negative form. All right, let's pause, you guys try this one and see how it goes. So what you would do first is you would divide by -3. You definitely want to take that negative with you. You get x squared equals 8. And we would then square root. And we would just say that x equals plus or minus the square root of 8. Right? Because we can't square root 8. It's not perfect. And we know that square roots will have two answers. Sorry, my nose. I feel like I was gonna sneeze. Excuse me, there it is. So we can't have two answers. We are always gonna have two answers. Now, another thing we can do is we can actually incorporate our 9.3 notes to this. We know that 8 is 4 times 2, right, plus or minus. So we would square root 4 and get 2, and we would just say plus or minus 2 square roots of 2. So this is actually another way you can write the answer. If they ask you to write your final answer in, not with all the perfect roots pulled out, you would need the second answer. If it doesn't ask you to do that, then you can leave it as the first answer. But these are equivalent. If you take negative 2 times 2 square roots of 2 and square it, you will get 8. And if you take positive 2 times the square root of 2 and square it, you will get 8. So these are equivalent, just like we were practicing in 9.3, okay? So we can apply our 9.3 notes to get cleaned up square roots. All right, so for these, you do the same thing. We're just doing inverse operations. So I'm gonna go plus 5, 3x squared equals, and we get 27. We divide by 3. We get x squared equals 9. We square root, and we get x equals plus or minus 3. All right, it might be a good idea for you to pause and try this one and see how this other one goes. So we're gonna go minus 17. Hopefully that's what you did first. 209 minus 17 should have gotten you 192. So 3x squared equals 192. We would divide by 3. And when you divided by 3, you should have gotten 64. So we get x squared equals 64. And then we square root. That's not a very pretty square root, but that's okay. X equals plus or minus 8. All right, a cell phone tower has a guide wire for support as shown. Here's the guide wire. The height of the tower and the distance of the tower to where the guide wire is secured on the ground are the same distance. So you can see they say X and X. It says, what is the height of the tower? So this is similar to questions, 46 and 47 on the homework for 9.3. So you can see, again, we're still incorporating. So we use the Pythagorean theorem. So it's x squared plus x squared, because those are my legs, are going to equal my 200 squared. So if I combine these, I get 2x squared equals, I square 200, I get 40,000. I divide by 2, and I get x equals 20,000. And, oh, squared. I lost my squared. So then this is where we're going to square root. Okay. I'm going to use, breaking up 20,000, I'm going to use my 9.3 notes. So that's 2 times 100 times 100 would get me 20,000. And so here's my pair. So I can pull out this 100. And so I would get x equals plus or minus 100 square roots 2. Now, we are talking about a story problem, and so we can't use the negative, and so we won't worry about the negative. Technically, there's always two answers, so I'm always going to write my two answers. And then to find what the height of the tower is, we wouldn't say that the height of the tower is 100 square roots 2, so we would actually need to go 100 times 2 and then square root it. And it comes out to approximately, so I'm going to write height equals, and actually I'm going to put about, because it is approximately, I'm rounding, 141 feet. And what I did is I took 100 and times by the square root of 2 to get this, okay? And I only am using the positive because we are talking about a height, and there's no such thing as a negative height, right? I'm not even worrying about the negative. All right, so things to remember: square roots have two answers, the positive and the negative, okay? So square roots have two answers, positive and negative. And that didn't fit, so I'm just gonna make this a little smaller. Perfect. All right, so there's your independent practice. Solve it like we did here would be the best examples to look at. All right, until next time, adios.